Humble beginnings often hide historic destinies. It's easy to overlook a boy on a bicycle, just another kid with messy hair and scraped knees, pedaling through sleepy streets while the rest of the world dozes behind drawn curtains. His job isn't glamorous. In fact, it barely gets noticed. He tosses newspapers at doorsteps, dodges barking dogs, and learns to balance speed with precision. Because if he misses too many porches, he hears about it. Not from the people inside the houses, no, they're still in their pajamas, but from the quiet voice inside him that's already learning the difference between good enough and not quite. There are no cheering crowds, no headlines for the paperboy, only a handful of quarters and a route that doesn't care if he's tired, cold, or in the mood. Every morning, the choice is the same: stay in bed or get on the bike. And every morning he chooses the bike. What he doesn't know, what none of us really know when we're in it, is that this small repetitive choice is carving something into his soul, something permanent, something priceless. You see, success doesn't always shout when it begins. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers in the early hours of the morning. It whispers through cracked knuckles and frozen handlebars. It whispers as you walk past kids who are still sleeping, knowing that while you were working, they were dreaming. But some dreams aren't seen with closed eyes. Some dreams are built wide awake. It's in those early hours that the foundation is laid. Not just for the day, but for a life. A foundation made of effort without applause, duty without drama, responsibility without recognition. Because when a boy learns to deliver newspapers without needing a pat on the back, he's learning to carry far heavier loads later in life without waiting for someone to clap. This kind of beginning doesn't make the evening news, but it creates the people who do. The world often sees greatness only after it's polished. The medals, the speeches, the arenas, the boardrooms. The spotlight. But that spotlight, it only shines on what's already there. It reveals. It doesn't build. What builds a person is what happens long before the lights turn on. It's easy to believe that heroes are born with capes or destinies, that champions just arrive on the scene already powerful. But more often than not, they come from paper routes, from standing up when no one's looking, from saying yes to responsibility when it would be easier to say no. The boy who delivered newspapers didn't know his name would one day be printed in them. He had no idea he'd grow into someone whose voice would echo in halls of power, whose face would be recognized around the globe. He only knew that if he didn't get the job done, it wouldn't get done. And that's where greatness begins. Not with knowing you're destined for more, but with doing what's in front of you like it matters. Because it does. Every porch hit right. Every house reached on time. Every mile ridden before breakfast was a silent lesson. A lesson in ownership, in grit, in showing up for life. So yes, humble beginnings often go unnoticed. They don't come with applause, or press releases, or standing ovations. But they do come with something far more powerful: momentum. The kind of momentum that builds day by day, quietly, patiently, until one day, it breaks through. And the world says, wow, where did he come from? But you'll know. You'll know he came from the same place all giants start, from small places doing small things with great consistency. He was the paper boy, and now you know his name. Discipline at dawn becomes destiny by dusk. There's something different about the hours before the sun rises. The world is still, the streets are silent, and the air carries a kind of sacred weight, like it's holding its breath before the chaos of the day begins. Most people are still lost in sleep, wrapped in warmth, avoiding the cold truth of responsibility, but not him. Not the boy on the bike. He wakes before the alarm. Not because he has to, but because he's trained himself to. His shoes are already by the door, the papers stacked neatly beside them. He doesn't complain. There's no one to hear it, and even if there were, he knows the work wouldn't care. The job remains whether he feels like doing it or not. And so without fanfare, he starts his day. That's where discipline lives, in the quiet spaces where no one is watching. In the mornings when the bed is warm and the world is cold. In the decision to do what's necessary rather than what's comfortable. This boy, young as he is, already understands something that takes others decades to learn. How you do anything is how you'll do everything. The way you rise sets the tone for the way you lead, the way you live, the way you become. While others press snooze, he pushes forward. Every morning ride, every folded paper tossed with precision, it all becomes part of something larger. Not a routine, but a rhythm. Not a job, but a mindset. What begins as obligation becomes ownership. What begins as habit becomes character. And discipline has a way of repaying those who honor it. Not with immediate results, but with eventual transformation. Day after day, the boy builds more than just muscle. He builds momentum. He doesn't realize it yet, but this daily decision to rise and work is crafting the architecture of his future. One day, the sun will rise, and the world will know his name. They'll see the polished version, the leader, the innovator, the visionary. They'll see the headlines, the accolades, the stages. But they won't see the paper route. They won't see the mornings when he was the only soul awake for blocks, the handlebars that numbed his fingers, the discipline that began before he even understood the word. What they'll miss is the truth, that success isn't sudden. It doesn't crash in like a wave. It creeps in quietly, like morning light through a cracked curtain. And if you've trained yourself to meet the morning with purpose, you'll be ready when it comes. Discipline is not glamorous. It doesn't offer applause. It offers preparation. It teaches you to show up when no one asks you to follow through when quitting would be easier, to rely on your own word, not the world's approval. The boy with the paper route was never chasing greatness. He was honoring commitment. That, in the end, is what led him to greatness. Because discipline doesn't promise immediate reward. It promises eventual revelation. The revelation that all those early mornings weren't in vain. That every quiet sacrifice prepared him to carry the weight of louder responsibilities. That while others waited for motivation, he trained in consistency. And so as dusk falls and the world claps for him, hands raised, lights flashing, headlines declaring, he doesn't flinch. He's been here before. Not in the spotlight, but in the dark, on the street, on the bike, alone. Doing what had to be done. And that's why he's ready now. Because when you train yourself to rise before the sun, you won't stumble when the light finally finds you. Discipline at night, destiny by dusk, and all because a boy chose to deliver newspapers like it was the most important job in the world. One day it was. The weight of the bag builds the strength of the man. It started out heavy, shoe heavy, really for a boy his size. A canvas sack filled with rolled newspapers, slung over his small shoulder, pulling at his spine as he wobbled on the bike. The first few mornings it almost won, nearly tipped him over. 0. Nearly convinced him to quit. But something inside him, maybe pride, maybe purpose, kept him pedaling. He didn't complain. Not out loud anyway. He just adjusted, shifted the strap, changed his grip, learned how to balance the weight better, and with each morning came more control. With each delivery, more confidence. He didn't know it then, but something far more important than newspapers was being delivered. Because that bag, awkward, overstuffed, and unforgiving, was the first weight he ever carried. And it wouldn't be the last. There's a strange blessing hidden in burden. At first, it feels like punishment. Why do I have to carry this? Why is this mine? But over time, the burden becomes the lesson. It teaches you to brace your core, to focus your mind, to find rhythm in repetition. And without knowing it, you begin to grow, not in size, but in stature. The weight builds strength, but not just in arms and legs, in will, in responsibility, in endurance, in the kind of mental toughness that doesn't flinch when things get heavy later in life. Because life gets heavier. The loads change. The newspapers become deadlines, expectations, bills, dreams. People who count on you. But if you've trained underweight from an early age, you don't break, you don't fold, you don't look for someone to carry it for you. You adjust the strap, you shift your stance, you move forward. The boy didn't understand that yet. He only knew that the job had to be done, and no one else was going to do it for him. He learned how to organize the papers to distribute the weight evenly. He learned how to lean into the corners on his bike so the bag wouldn't slide. He learned how to stay balanced even when the road was cracked or slick. Later in life, those skills would have no direct translation. There's no job application that asks how well you slung newspapers over your shoulder at dawn. But the real strength was never in the act itself. It was in the ability to carry a load, to remain steady when things shifted, to keep showing up even when the bag felt heavier than the day before. And when the world finally noticed him, when they applauded his leadership, marveled at his endurance, celebrated his resilience, what they didn't realize is that the strength they admired wasn't built in the spotlight. It was built on sidewalks, in silence, in the weight of that morning bag. The boy didn't grow up chasing strength. He earned it 1 ounce at a time, 1 morning at a time, 1 mile at a time. And because of that, when greater responsibilities came knocking, when the weight of decisions, of influence, of legacy began pressing down, he didn't collapse. He didn't panic. He'd carried weight before. He understood the mechanics of pressure. It's funny how the smallest things prepare us for the biggest ones. A boy, a bike, a bag of newspapers, it's nothing. But in reality, it's a training ground for the rest of life. It's the first test of whether you can carry what you've been given, whether you can show up again and again without needing recognition, whether you can do hard things long before anyone sees or cares. And that's what makes a man strong, not just muscle or ambition, but the willingness to carry weight when no one else will. The ability to take on the load without waiting for a lighter day. The weight of the bag never got easier. He just got stronger. And long after the paper stopped printing his route, long after the bike was gone, and the porch deliveries were a distant memory, the strength remained. It followed him into boardrooms, into challenges, into history. Because once you've carried the weight of responsibility as a boy, you'll never be afraid of it as a man. Fame rarely starts loud. It starts with quiet consistency. There was no camera waiting at the corner when he made that first delivery. No spotlight on the boy adjusting his cap and stepping into the chilled dawn air. No reporter documenting how tightly he tied his shoelaces or how carefully he placed the folded newspapers into the canvas bag. No one clapped when he finished his route. There was no applause, only silence. But that silence was sacred, because it was in those quiet, unseen moments that something powerful was taking root. He didn't wake up one morning and become known. No one does. The people you recognize today, the ones whose names are carved into memory, they didn't begin with interviews or headlines. They began with alarm clocks, with discipline, with one small, repeatable act done again and again, not for attention, but for honor. The boy didn't ask who was watching. He didn't need to be told it mattered. He had a job to do, and that was enough. Rain or wind, darkness or frost, he kept pedaling, kept delivering, kept showing up. That's where greatness lives, not in the noise, but in the quiet refusal to quit. It's tempting to think that extraordinary people are simply born different, that fame and influence fall into their laps like gifts. But the truth is simpler and much more demanding. Most legacies are built before the world notices. They're built on routines that feel unimportant, even invisible. They're built in mornings when the mind says stay in bed, but the soul says get to work. And so he did. He didn't know yet what he was becoming. All he knew was that consistency meant something. That if you start something, you finish it. That if someone's expecting you, even if it's just a silent porch, you deliver. And that silent promise he made to himself, to be dependable even when no one was watching, would later become the very reason everyone watched. There's something about quiet consistency that separates people. It's not flashy. It's not fast, but it's faithful. And that faithfulness, over time, becomes a kind of magnet. It draws attention, not by demanding it, but by deserving it. People eventually began to notice. They noticed the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he never backed away from the work. They called it talent. They called it charisma. They called it drive. But what they didn't see was the years of ordinary mornings, the long stretch of invisible work that built the core beneath the shine. It's easy to clap when someone's on stage, easy to admire when the results are visible. But what the world forgets is that every standing ovation is built on a foundation of quiet, private choices. The applause is just the echo. The real music was made in silence. The boy became a man. The man became a name, a symbol, a presence. And while the world was amazed at how quickly he arose, he knew better. He hadn't risen quickly at all. He'd simply risen early, over and over again. He hadn't chased attention. He'd outlasted it. Because while others were waiting for inspiration, he was building momentum. While others were asking for shortcuts, he was mastering the long road. He wasn't interested in being seen for doing something once. He was committed to doing something well. 1,000 times, until it could no longer be ignored. Fame came later, much later. But when it did, he didn't flinch. Because he'd already faced the harder thing. The years when no one cared. The days when it was just him. The cold, the rude, and the promise. And that promise that he would give his best even when it felt like no one noticed, became the very reason the world eventually knew his name. Quiet consistency doesn't just build habits, it builds heroes. And if you follow the echo of greatness all the way back to its origin, you'll rarely find noise. You'll find a boy, a routine, a task done well without fanfare. You'll find the early mornings, the quiet roads, and a life being built one paper, one pedal, one promise at a time. That's where it starts. Not loud, but lasting.